to my cellar. You know, I was just thinking I need to spend another $1 or $2 on my fabulous special effects in the background. In any event, I'm told I don't speak loudly enough, so we'll see how this works. And here we go. If you could do it all over again, since you had a lot of input in the game, not a ton, but some, and some of it was formative. What rules would you install into the game that weren't there originally of doing it today? Well, trying to understand the question. If it's a rule that has been added that we missed or forgot or it became necessary to have, well, it's really hard. I would make intelligence gathering a lot more valuable and getting it, asking for it, ferreting it out from the DM should be a recognized ability, knack, skill, call it what you will, and therefore could be compensated for. There's not enough question asking today. I can tell a later edition player from an earlier edition player when they're all sitting at my Wheel of Blame game, because the later edition players don't ask very many questions. And I think that part of that might be that they're too reliant on skills and ability checks to just do things for them. Now, again, this is my perceptions of it. I don't play the later editions, but I do follow the arguments and discussions, or call them what you will, on Facebook at least. That's just, there ought to be a way to, perceptive questions that lead to discoveries, whether they're clues or bigger, those ought to be valued. I think if they were, more people would be more apt to ask the questions that they're just thinking, being afraid of being thought silly or just being shy. Maybe something of that nature. It would have been a rule of thumb type thing to use for the DM to use, but it would have forced recognition of that skill set. If you were to be a player in a game, who would you want to be your DM and 4 table mates? This can be anyone living or dead. Alternately, if you were the DM, what 5 players would make your ultimate group, living or deceased? Thirdly, in the context of the previous 2 questions, what would be the game system played in the above scenarios? A long time ago, Steve Allen, who many of you probably, look him up, he was a comedian and a very powerful forming agent or formative force in the beginnings of TV. And anyway, he did a program where he would have a round table, literally, of interesting characters from history. And a couple, 3 of them you would know the names, and a couple of them you wouldn't, but then he'd explain why they were there. And they would have these round table discussions, each from their own vantage point. Well, doing something like that would be a real hoot, but you wouldn't get any games played because you'd sit around enjoying each other's brilliant, witty conversation, and you wouldn't get much playing done. If I was being the DM, who would I want in my group? Well, I've really gone to playing for fun and playing for laughs a lot lately, so I think that would be an important part of my choices. Like if I could get, hey, let's have Robin Williams and George Carlin at the same table. And, I don't know. I played one time with Joe Manganiello. He was a lot of fun. Let's get him at the table. And, living or dead, I would love to run a game, have Gary as a player in my game. I would love that. So, I don't know, that's a table of 4. I'm more comfortable with 5 to 7, but I'm sure I could add more, and I could forget some, and then people would be offended and think I was an idiot for not, how could you not possibly pick this? So I'll just leave it at that. The idea is intriguing, though. But if you got all these really interesting people at the table, how much playing would you actually get done? And I don't know, would George Carlin get into the spirit of things and play D&D? I don't know. Interesting to find out, though. I've always wondered what your inspirations for the Psionics system were. It feels so unique and has very strange nomenclature compared to the rest of AD&D. I've always been a fan of it. Well, thank you, and welcome to the minority. What inspired putting Psionics in was Gary already had some stuff in there, brain moles and thought eaters, and that horrendous mind flare that came out in one of the early strategic reviews, and player characters had virtually no defense. They couldn't fight back. And in many cases, they couldn't even defend themselves. And I argued strenuously that that wasn't right. And so he said, fine, come up with a system. And so the only psionic stuff that I had to work on was some science fictions stories that I read over the years about enhanced brain power and forcing your will on people, and Doctor Strange, because there's a lot of things in there that you would recognize if you were a long time back then, particularly Strange reader. The nomenclature and wording's different because somebody else did it. Somebody different did it. Me. So yeah, it's different. I learned to write High Gygaxian, but I didn't know how to do it then. I wanted the player characters, and again, I have to stress that psionics was supposed to be infinitesimally rare. One of those things when you're rolling up a new group that, yeah, okay, everybody roll, and anybody psionic? No, didn't think so. Infinitesimally rare. And that's why I made it so difficult to even have the possibility of having psionics, and then it was such a tiny little... And of course, the gaming world ran with it, and everybody was psionic. But it was a lot of it was Doctor Strange, and the Fortress of Will, and Gary already had something in there about traveling, or maybe it was in this supplement when you were astrally traveling in the silver cord that couldn't be snapped. Well, that was straight out of Marvel Comics and Doctor Strange, which got it from ancient Asian legends and folk tales and what have you. I got to keep remembering to look up here. I know I'm bad at this. I don't know why anybody listens. You don't have to look; you just listen. And I'm glad you're a fan of it. Two true psionics duking it out is fun if you know the system. And it's been so long since I've used it, I'd have to go back and reread it. Tim, would it be possible for different dragon species to interbreed, like, say, breeding between tigers and lions, jaguars and leopards, etc.? For example, a white and a red, a white and a black, a red and a gold, blue and a red, green and blue. What would they be? What would he? What kind of offspring would it produce? Well, I don't believe. Pardon me. I don't believe that the lower ones, the lower forms of dragons, including one of my favorites, probably my favorite dragon, but I don't believe the lower forms and everything that isn't a red, a gold, or a white, I would consider a lower form, perhaps black. I'm not sure how black dragons work in the present day game, but because I don't recall us having black dragons, or they were very, very rare, and now I think they've been changed somewhat. In any event, okay. Problem number one: what do we assume dragons are? Of course, we know they're magical and they don't really exist. Okay, that aside, are they dinosaurs? Are they lizards? Okay, and I'm talking about, genus, species, order, all that kind of stuff. So if they were too far apart from each other, I would say no, they can't interbreed. Just like, let's see. There are, for one thing, the lion tiger, that's extremely rare and hard to achieve. And that's with relatively a lot of those animals around. Dragons being so rare, at least they should be, and so few and far between, that they'd have to be incredibly promiscuous to just, roar about flaming stuff and having interspecies relations. That said, could there be genetic freaks? Certainly. I think that it would be more fun to have a dragon that appears to be of one color, but is formed, and its formation is not any other one exactly, especially. And okay, the very rare crossbreeding would make an interesting story plot, but I wouldn't do it promiscuously or haphazardly, simply because that's how I envision and what I think of dragons and their nobility and whatever is a lot of what chose me to name the magazine what I did. And maybe the higher ones might, but there's alignment issues going on there, and I don't promote anything that suggests force or abuse or anything like that. However, okay, again, if you're going to have crossbreeds, I would think they'd be more likely to happen in the lower forms of dragons. And if they did, and again, it would be a very rare, what the genetics people call a sport. It would be a very rare occasion. What powers could they have? Well, they might have both the parents, one of the parents, neither of the parents. Not necessarily something different, but maybe something between, some weird cross between what the parents had as weaponry, particularly breath weaponry, whether it's acid or flame or ice or, whatever. Next question, and now we're going to go into theology. Fantasy theology, with apologies to Derek White, the Greek preacher. If a cleric should choose to forego their vows in order to take up with some other power, let's say it's a classic deal with the devil type situation as in Faust, but in fantasy, to what extent would this cause inter-deity problems? Okay, that's the first half of the question. This would be, to answer this would be to assume some level of omniscience on the part of the DM that includes being able to observe the gods. Okay, that said, how do you perceive the deities in your campaign? Are they like the gods of Olympus, who sit up and look down and fool around in the affairs of men, of mortals? Or are they more aloof and playing a long-term game? Most current theology leans toward one way. In fantasy, it's probably more fun to go off in different oddball directions. If you have a background of the gods are vying for support and jealous of each other's followers, and your backstory as the DM in getting this cleric tempted to the point where he would do this thing. Okay, this is all a great deal of detail that I'm going to have to assume. And assuming that you favor the guys sitting around in togas, guys and women sitting around in togas and stolas around the bowl with the earth in it, fooling around, well then, okay, maybe. But does your campaign somehow reflect? Is the theology of your campaign so pervasive and so important that the strife between the people looking down into the bowl is going to affect your campaign? Then I suggest the DM might possibly be overstepping his reach or her reach. If you're going to assume the gods and start smiting with thunderbolts, that's in danger of becoming a real railroad game. Do it my way or get smote. Just a thought. And what would it do? Okay, if you had a player, the second half, if you had a player who wanted to change this drastically, would you treat it the same as someone wanting to get a special magic item made for, money, layout, special ingredients, rituals, time? No. Again, the significance of this happening is entirely dependent upon the role of your theology in your campaign. If your deities are watching and toying with the lives of men, and one of these mere mortals says, screw you, Hermes, I'm going to follow Artemis. And that's just the first two names I popped out of my head. It may not go all that well for you. Hermes might decide he's vengeful and jealous, and so he might decide to smite you. Maybe Artemis isn't ready to accept you yet, and you put yourself open very, very vulnerably to not having a deity to call upon. If a player's cleric started to do and go that direction, and then later on decided, oh, bad idea, I made a mistake, well, then I would see to it that person had to go, was put under some sort of geas, and would have to go do something to restore their honor or their good standing, or whatever like that. This is just my opinion now. It seems to me that the increased focus on deities is another form of trying to ramp up your character. My deity's tougher than yours, and he'll give me more stuff. Just a passing observation. Have you ever changed the potency of monsters or foes mid-game that turned out to be too powerful for the PCs? Yes. Yes. Especially in playtest sessions, but I guess that doesn't count. At con games, yes, I have. The party's already pretty beat up, and then they meet these 3 big trolls or whatever. I'll have the trolls already be beat up when they meet them, so it doesn't take a full load of HP to knock, or hit points to knock them off. But there again, I've been doing that since the very first adventures. Not looking for a TPK. And occasionally, why shouldn't the players catch a break once in a while? Why shouldn't they happen to catch a raiding party coming home all beat up and be able to not only beat them, but take what they stole and make it their own? Why not? Pardon me. So yeah, I've done that. How do you guesstimate the ratio of monster-foe strength for one of a better foe against the party strength during preparation? Is there a formula? I have a rule of thumb. Calling it a formula might be a little too formal. But what I do is I look up, first off, you need to know the average number that any polyhedral dice will roll. And so when I'm making up a monster or an ambush or something like that, for the potential detriment of the player characters, I use a rule of thumb of about 5 to 4, and that's average hit points dealt out, average hit points being able to take. I give the 5 advantage to the bad guys, the monsters, because usually, for the most part, they don't have spells and stuff going for them. Again, situational dynamics can change that. It's just a rule of thumb. It dates back to ranking what you croaked by number of hit dice. So how many hit dice does it have? Okay, so that being the case, if I'm preparing an encounter, all right, if I'm writing something for 7th to 9th level characters, I'll generally use average numbers, bump just a tiny bit of an 1/8, just because it falls in the range. And so, how many hit points, how many hit dice do the player characters have? How many hit points? I always give the bad guys a little more. Not a lot, always, but a little more. Maybe a lot if they're stupid monsters, mindless, attacking, whatever. But not as many if they're smart and intelligent and they're able to reason and control other things than that. Not as many. Because when I'm doing that, I look at what kind of damage can they wield. All right, if they can do something that is 6d8s, okay, big smite with a magic weapon or whatever, or the monster can do it with a 6d8, big nasty black hammer or whatever. That's 6 times 4.5, because 4.5 is the average number you'll roll on the d8. So okay, it makes that many, 27 hit points average per hit. Now it can range down to a single one, a single pip a die. It can range up to a max, but that's the average. So, given the averages, how tough are they going to be in dealing out damage to the player characters? I think it should always favor the bad guys a little bit, because that makes it more heroic, more experience points to pick up, and also because the magic users, or the player characters, can coordinate to a much better degree than the DM can coordinate all his monsters, who, if they are truly just a monster, are of limited intelligence and limited skills and abilities. It's just, it feels right. There is no mathematical formula, but those are the things to consider. And then consider, okay, this many creatures with this many points that deal an average damage of this, and you look at the players and you do the same thing with them, and what kind of average damage are they going to do, and you'll know when it's right. And that's why if you're ever going to try to do something at a con or write one for publication, you got to play test. Why? Because no matter how well you think it out, it can go wrong. Case in point, I wrote a little side adventure in the chaos when Iron Wind redid the Chaos Wars a few years back. I wrote a role-playing adventure that fit into the Chaos Wars campaign, and then I set up, I drew the battlefield and deployed all the troops in that for the final Chaos Wars conflict. And I made them, the player characters were orcs and goblins, and they were off to rob the tomb of a dwarf for this uber weapon that was buried with him. And I had just a very simple caravan with just a handful of first level guards, or even a couple might have been 0 levels. And it was a chance early in the game, early in the adventure, to get your evil on. And good thing I play tested it, because I had to really nerf those caravan guards, because orcs and goblins take so few hit points. And the party would be half beat up before they got the last guard. Is it wise to use monsters rules as written, or is it best to tweak them to your player party's level, or just clarity in this question, one of flavor? Yeah, and I've heard that term in 5e too. I have hardly ever, unless it was a graded tournament thingy that I was involved in early on, I don't believe I've ever used monsters as written, ever. Back in the early days, we told everybody, you don't have to follow this. And so I don't. That's the beauty of old school. Do it the way you want to. And that's the way I do it. Okay. All right. Oh, now we're talking about megadungeons. Although maybe not 30 plus levels deep and full of orcs and treasures, there are a few places on Earth that could easily be considered in the mega dungeon category. I agree. I don't believe I precluded that possibility. Namely, the underground city of Derinkoya in Turkey, which is about 11 levels and 85 meters deep. The catacombs of Paris, which drops below 19 meters and stretches under the city for hundreds of miles. Yes, I believe I might have mentioned them. If I didn't, I meant to. Yeah, I mean, there are examples that you can follow. And many sci-fi, or many fantasy stories focus on being underground. Gee, wonder how that happened. The Odessa catacombs. Okay, I agree. It's possible. It's possible. I can't personally hold interest for that long because it becomes increasingly silly that, these thousands of rooms all have something in them, because that doesn't work. As several interesting cartoon strips the last few days on Facebook have pointed out. So they'd be primarily empty, and you'd be exploring dozens of rooms for every one that you might find something in it. Just my opinion. Okay, regarding the dungeon master being racist. It appears that the word master is being touted as problematic. Yeah, okay, apparently this started with realtors in Texas. As if enough crazy shit doesn't start in Texas already, now the realtors are worried about using the word master, like in master bedroom, master bath. So now it's main, okay. Okay, that's fine. But you didn't have to take it any further than what you call a bathroom or a bedroom. Okay, I can't get a life. All right. Now I have a little bit of a rant against a particular company that I don't even know if they're still in business, but this is a question that has plagued the game industry for decades. Now, philosophers like to debate which came first, the chicken or the egg. I, on the other hand, tonight will point out that the same argument can be made in our industry. Which came first, the minis or the rules? There is a company, and again, this game came out around the turn of the century. It's called Battlefleet Gothic. Great, big, heavy book, color pages. Color pages. Why color? A few, so you knew how to paint the minis. A very good friend of mine wants me to learn this game to play with him. The reason he loves the game is because he is a painter, a masterful painter, and he went way down the rabbit hole on the Battlefleet minis. So he's painted up all these minis, and he wants to play with them. Which is, that's cool, that's natural. That's why we paint up minis for the most part, except for the one-offs that we put up on the shelf. But it's Games Workshop production, Citadel Games Workshop. So the question becomes, what happened? How did this product come to be? Did their sculptor come in one day and go, "Oh man, you should see the really neat designs I've got for some starships"? Check this out, man. Look at this great big Battlefleet thingy. Now this came out, between 95 and 99. And I rather suspect that sculptors at Citadel decided to get into the Starship game, because everybody else was, and not having a product of their own or a movie to hook it to or whatever, they said, okay, well, let's do all these cool spaceships, and then we'll make some rules. Are there problems with the rules? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. There are many, 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 many problems with the rules, which is not to say that there might not be a game in there. The first suspension of disbelief you have to swallow is this enormous ship. All right, see it next to my finger for comparison, okay? It's as long as my finger. This enormous ship isn't this enormous on the board, or else we'd be playing all over the entire basement floor. But at the base, you're a little itty-bitty red dot. That's your ship. This, I think, Star Wars. This is like a holographic representation of the battle of the fleets, of the shooting at each other. All right? Many, 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 thousands of times magnified so that the admirals can see what's going on. All right, that's the first thing you got to swallow. Okay, because you look at the game and you skim through the rules and you see that something's got a range of 30 centimeters and hell's bells, this thing's 30 centimeters. Oh, we're playing in outer space and I can move one length. Well, but when you think you're that little pinhead, straight pinhead down there at the bottom of that base, now 30 centimeters is a long way away in relative scale. But again, you have to swallow into this concept. You have to buy into it and be able to visualize it. So I told him, oh, sure, I'll learn, and this is how I came. I'll try to learn the game, I said, and this is how I came to this impasse. The rules are shit. They're poorly organized, and there's some major questions right off the bat. Is it a turn-based game? Is it a simultaneous game? If it's a turn-based game, does only the moving player get to shoot? It's simultaneous. Does everybody get to shoot all the time, anytime you got somebody in your field of fire? They're very vague on this. Very vague. Now, they've got some movement rules that most remind me of a sailing game. Move so much, and then you can turn 45 or 90, depending upon your size and speed. Mostly size. So this game was out for about 5 years, and probably died a slow, lingering death that it deserved. But then, right around the turn of the century, somebody, Citadel or Games Workshop, went out in the warehouse one day and said, holy crap, we got a few figures left over. Let's revive it. So then they came out with a whole new book called Armada. Now, if you looked at these great big books with all their pages, you'd be, oh my God, that's way too many rules. Well, they aren't. That's just it. This is rules light, and all the crap in these two books is stories, fiction, about the various factions in the war, and then there's color pictures, so you can see all the pretty ways you can paint the figures. So apparently, oh hell, we got a whole bunch of these. So they get ready to sell those. They made up a few new ones. They put out Armada. Oh, by the way, anything if it's in Armada and it's different from Gothic, well, Armada takes precedent So, change all your thinking on various rules, and you won't know what they are until you get there. So, this is clearly a case of let's make a set of rules for these minis we want to sell. Because it's classically been the other way around. Somebody comes out with a great game, minis come out right after, licensed, or snicker, oh no, that's not, whatever. It's my understanding and my observation that this is a common business model. See, I've never really had much respect for Games Workshop ever since they came out with Warhammer, because Warhammer, you spent quite a lot of money and time invested in painting them, and you fielded point value armies, and then a year or two later, two of the units that maybe 60 units, 60 pieces in a unit, or two 30s, no longer eligible for that year's battles. So now you got to go buy some new ones. And there are people who gladly do it. That's their shtick. But if you're going to take advantage of the people that'll do that, my God, give them a decent set of rules, huh? Is that too much to ask? Oh, and in answer to an earlier thing about who I'd like at my table, I would love to have Fritz and Harry Fisher, Fritz Lieber. They were role-playing before it was such a thing, way, way, way back when. And both wonderful gentlemen with marvelous minds. And, of course, now they're both deceased. But I'm not. So, I think that's all I've got to talk about tonight. A wrap on Warhammer. Be careful. Don't fall for it. If you see figures and they aren't immediately usable with some other rule set or some other genre, be very careful before you dive in and make sure that the rules aren't shit. These rules are shit. However, I think, hubris or not, that I can find a game in there and bring it out. Speaking of a game in there, for several years after I came back into the business, I fielded shots about the three books of the original books of D&D were not a game; they were just pieces for making one. And I said, no, it's there. It just was written for shit, and that's part of how I got hired. Somebody came out with a re-editing of the original three books, a couple of bits from a couple of the first two strategic reviews that Gary wrote, and reorganized it, reordered it, and absolutely, there is a game there. It's all there. It's got a white cover, and it says it's not printed by TSR or something like that on the bottom. I don't know if you can, maybe it's PDF somewhere, I don't know. I was gifted with a copy, and it's vindication of all these years that I've seen, no, there's really a game there, you just don't know how to look. Because you're not a miniatures player, for one thing, and it was written from the standpoint of somebody that was playing miniatures in the 70s. It's a whole different ballgame. Featherstone would come back today and go, wow, that sure has changed. And Donald Featherstone's one of the founders of minis. All right, anyway, I've expounded enough for tonight. So I'm done. I only have things to talk about if you leave comments. So please do. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Dodada Gobi.
curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Last man around when them rates went down. Calling Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought Psionics to the game to attack that wizard's brain. ESR and fantasy, collection of micro armory. Titan with tramp under a tree,
High as could be. He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Curmudgeon.